So good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everybody who's joining us this afternoon. I'm Amy Keithan. I've met most of you, but I'm the Museum Services Manager here at PHC. And we're really excited to have everybody here on today's program, Making History Accessible, Expanding Access to PHC's Archives with Hannah Cain. Hannah grew up in Brunswick and she's always loved history. She remembers history coming alive when visiting the Schofield Whittier House in elementary school. And since then, she's continued to explore her love of history. A student at the University of Southern Maine, Hannah's receiving her BA in English with a history minor, and she's completing her degree this month. So a huge congratulations for that. During the spring semester of 2021, she completed an internship at USM's Franco-American collection, where she created a finding aid for the LePage Bakery collection, as well as completed transcriptions to expand the collection's online accessibility for e-readers. She was excited to have the opportunity to carry out an internship at PHC this fall through USM's Putting History to Work program, so that she could gain more experience for her postgraduate plans. I've had the pleasure of supervising Hannah during her time here at PHC. When she arrived, we worked together to build a custom internship program that would provide her with skills that would be the most useful for her future plans, as well as taking advantage of her considerable experiences to improve accessibility for our collections, which is something that we're constantly working on. So Hannah's work here, as well as some unique finds in the collection, are what form the basis of her talk today. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Hannah, and I'll see you all here back at the end for the Q&A. Take it away, Hannah.
Thank you, Amy. I'm gonna share my screen here. Thank you everyone for coming. I see a lot of names that I recognize, and it is lovely to know that I have people who I know and are supporting me today, so thank you. Like Amy had mentioned, I have always had a really big love of history. I spent most of my life growing up in Maine, but there were a few years before we moved here when we lived in the Midwest, and there were a lot of living history museums. And so from a very young age, I was interested in learning about history through a more hands-on approach. And we visited the Schofield House and the Chamberlain Museums in elementary school. And so I remember that very fondly. And when I got the opportunity to do an internship at PHC, it was very exciting because it was kind of coming full circle to come back and get to work hands-on with history in my hometown. So that was very exciting. Like Amy had mentioned, my big goal for myself for this internship this semester was working with ways that we can expand the accessibility of PHC's archives. So making collections accessible means a lot of different things, right? From the historical archive standpoint, we want to think about preservation and keeping items in as excellent shape for as long as we can. There's also the really big emphasis on moving forward. We're in the 21st century, and we want to make sure that archives stay relevant and they stay current, and that it's something that the younger generations aren't going to lose. And so for archives and most everything, that means transitioning to online formats. At PHC, we use a program called Past Perfect, and Past Perfect is the online inventory for keeping all of the items that are in the collection. If you're not familiar or you haven't visited PHC's side, not either of the museums, we have a massive collection, a massive archive with all sorts of different items, everything from papers to photographs to clothing. And it's a wonderful, wonderful resource that we have. And we want to be able to share that with as many people as possible. So when we're looking at collections, one of the things that I did for this internship was that I created a template for a finding aid for collections. I also worked to organize and edit items in the Past Perfect inventory. And because I love working with hands-on methods for history, I got to give tours of the Schofield Whittier house, which may have been my favorite thing that I got to do. So these all are going to tie into each other. So what is a finding aid, right? So when historians and researchers, or people who are just interested in learning about local history, want to work with a collection and they want to go to an archive, they aren't going to go through massive collections and massive amounts of paper to try to find information. They want to know what's in a collection. So that's where a finding aid comes in. And what a finding aid is going to do is it's going to tell the researcher, it's going to give them a summary of what's in the collection. It's going to give them dates. It's going to give them names if there are any available. And it's going to give key terms that you could essentially search for in an online database. And so I worked this semester to create a template for a finding aid that PHC will be able to use for their collections. Moving forward, future volunteers will be able to take this template and the instructions that I've created to go along with it, and they'll be able to better catalog the massive amount of collections that we have sitting upstairs in the amazing archive room. And this is really important because I know I don't know everything that's up there. I'm sure Amy and Larissa at PHC don't know everything that's up in that room, but it's going to offer a much wider availability to researchers or to volunteers who want to work with this material to be able to go in and get a quick idea of the items that are there. PHC works primarily through the very large amount of absolutely incredible volunteers. And so that will be a process that will take a little while, but it's a little bit more fun that way because then lots of people get to interact with these materials and get to piece it all together, and it's more of a group effort. So when I was doing tours of the Schofield Whittier house, I really loved getting to learn pieces of history from other docents who were doing tours or from things that I found in PHC's collections and taking that information and getting to incorporate it into my tours. That was really special. If you've gone on a tour of the Schofield Whittier house, you're probably familiar with the Saturday Club. If you have not, the Saturday Club was a women's club in Brunswick. It was a social and political club that the Schofield Whittier women were very active in. And so when I was starting my work going through the collections room, I found that we have a Saturday Club collection box. And so I chose to work primarily with that for making after I made my finding aid template, I made a sample finding aid, and I chose to work with the Saturday Club box out of personal interest. If you've been in the Schofield house, the image on the right, you'll recognize as a poster that was hand painted for one of the plays that the women in the Saturday Club put on. And I was able to find that in that Saturday Club collection box, we have the program for that particular play. And it has all the names of the women from Brunswick who participated in it. There were women who did the acting. There were women who were playing the piano or playing some instruments for the play. That's all listed in there. So that's very exciting because if someone in the future ever wanted to research women in Brunswick or women's history or women's social groups, knowing that we have that in the collection, they would definitely be able to research deeper into that. There are specific names, so they might be able to find a relative or someone that, you know, they were interested in learning more about. So I liked that because I point out that Saturday Club poster all the time when I give tours. So I was very excited to see that we know who was in that. So the other big project that I worked on was working in Past Perfect and working to accession items. So accessioning is when we are entering new items into our online inventory in Past Perfect. So while a finding aid is going to be used for a larger collection with multiple items, we are going to use Past Perfect to catalog individual items. And this could be letters, this could be photographs, it can be items that are like clothing. We have lots of shoes, hat pins. It has a very, very wide range of items that it can include. We are constantly accepting new items into the collection. Amy just told me prior to this talk that we, I guess, just accepted lots of masks, which will go along with the, I believe it will essentially end up being a collection of COVID. So that's very exciting, but we're constantly getting new things, and we want to make sure that we have that included on there so that if people want to learn more about those items, they can. Accessioning and a database like Past Perfect are really important because they definitely work to expand accessibility and availability to archives. We have a really, really fun thing at PHC, which is we can set up research appointments for people. A lot of the time it's people who are local or semi-local, and they want to learn more about either their historic home that they live in or a family member. I've gotten to pull some items for researchers who are coming in, and that's always fun to see what different people want to look into. But one of the things, the first thing that we do when someone comes in and says, hey, I want to learn about this, is check Past Perfect to see what's there, to see if, you know, the name that they want or the street that they want is in the system. And so us being able to do that and them being able to do that is really highly dependent on even having this database. And so it's really important that we have Past Perfect and have as many items cataloged in Past Perfect as possible. It's also going to get interesting with accessibility, because not everybody is able to, you know, physically go to archives, or maybe certain items you can't touch or really interact with because they're very old and they're not in great shape. They're looking a little rough. And so online databases like Past Perfect are very important because it allows more people to work with items that otherwise they might not be able to. We are slowly in the process of transitioning Past Perfect to the online version. Once we get a tad bit more funding, that will be something that will be available. And I do believe that we will further expand our accessibility of the collections because hopefully people will be able to remotely see what we have. So that will be very exciting when we get that extra funding. So I got to work in Past Perfect, and one of the things that I had done in my previous internship at USM's Franco-American collection that I brought to PHC was creating text specifically for images in Past Perfect that's going to allow people with e-readers, using e-readers, to have accessibility to these images. So this was a super fun picture that I found. And this, there was some handwriting on the back, so I know that these gentlemen here were postmen in Brunswick. Their names were listed on the back of the photograph. There were too many for me to name here now, but when you're looking at a picture and you want to create text for an e-reader, it's very easy to look at this picture and say it's a group of men. But you want to be a bit more specific than that. So we get to look at it and we get to say, okay, well, what really stands out? Well, it's a group of men and they're standing on steps, right? We know they're all facing the camera. They're all dressed very nicely. We can see that several in the front are wearing matching outfits. They're all holding their hats in their hands, most of them by the side. Quite a few of them are wearing glasses. The gentlemen in the back are wearing more professional suits. So perhaps those were the individuals working inside the post office. But going through very detailed and creating descriptions for images, that's something that I really love to do. I think it's super fun. And you get to actually learn a lot about history when you do that and you really start to pick things apart and look at them like that closely. When I was going through the photographs in Past Perfect, some of the photographs, and doing this by year, I came across a collection of photographs that were all donated from the same family. And I found one that I think very quickly became one of my favorite pictures. And I know from the collection that it was donated from that the couple in this photograph are Mr. and Mrs. Riley. They were the parents of the woman who donated a very large group of photographs. I really like this one because it reminds me of a picture of my grandparents. They're visiting Atlantic City. And I believe that likely this was a street photographer who took their picture because they do appear to be mid-step. But photographs like this are important to history and also fun to look at because we can tell a lot about the time period and about the people in the picture just by looking at the small details. The woman's hat and the style of dress that she's wearing, her bag. Not sure what the gentleman's holding, but some kind of package. The awnings behind them. Unfortunately, you can't really see in the store windows of this one, but this was another example of something that if you're describing it for an e-reader, it's, a man and a woman, they're walking down what appears to be a boardwalk. There's big, beautiful awnings of stores behind them. What the woman's wearing, she's wearing dark clothes, looks like a fur scarf, a decorative hat. They're mid-step, the gentleman's looking straight ahead, but the woman is looking straight at the camera with a lovely smile. And I love looking at this kind of thing. I really love the idea of being able to work in formats that are going to make stuff like this more accessible for a wider range of audience, because I think this is a fantastic picture. I love looking at it and learning about it, and I want to be able to do something that's going to work to make that accessible for other people so that they can find this and they can love it and learn more about it too. I am Amy. I am going to stop screen sharing. Give it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Can I ask you, please do, anyone, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. But could you talk a little bit about, I know you did some work for us in Past Perfect regarding tagging and search terms. Can you explain how that works, how you decide what search terms to include, and also updating search terms and why we might want to change a search term from an older search term to something more relevant today?
Absolutely. So when you're searching in Past Perfect, it's a little bit like if you go on the library website and you want to look for a book under a certain subject. So sometimes you're gonna have to be really specific, but you type in, you can type in names, places. So we'll use an example, say I wanted to learn about stores in Brunswick, right? So I might type in businesses, Brunswick, Maine, and I would see what would pop up. It would tell me. And so when you go in, and the work I was doing in Past Perfect was going through and making things a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, doing some grammatical and spell checking. And I was also going in when I had time and adding to the search terms. This is gonna help future people if they want to find something so that they know, oh, this is about businesses. These are meeting notes from a town meeting, and adding things like that. If there are any names, I found several things regarding Joshua Chamberlain while I was doing work that were not tagged with Chamberlain. So they were interesting pieces of information that were relating to him. A lot of researchers contact PHC wanting to know about Chamberlain, and so that's now something that they'll be able to see when they search him or when we search him in Past Perfect. Like Amy had said, there's also the component of keeping things relevant and up to date. That would also include keeping things politically correct. A lot of times in archives, things will get tagged with terms that we no longer use or that are no longer considered appropriate or polite. Oftentimes, they weren't tagged in that because the person entering it had maybe more outdated views. Sometimes we have items that have a word like that prominently in them or in their title. And so it's helpful to be able to go in and change it, change search terms so that we include things. There was one that was recently added to like African-American history instead of perhaps putting in Negroes, to include things like Inuit instead of Eskimo, items, terms like that, so that researchers are able to go in and use language and terms that probably we'd be using today. But it's also helpful to add something like objects of intolerance or racist items. And so if someone's looking more broadly, they'd be able to maybe type in like racism and find all sorts of things in the collection instead of having to go through and sort of cherry pick or nitpick a bit further. But that's just another way that things are staying more relevant.
Fantastic, thank you. Jim St. Pierre has asked, Jim, by the way, is the curator of our current exhibit. So quite knowledgeable about PHC and himself, but he wants to know if we have a plan and timeline to digitize images of more items in the PHC collection. And I know I've talked with you about this because I work with volunteers who do that, but I know you know a bit about it too. So can you talk about how the work that our volunteers are doing works with Past Perfect?
Absolutely. PHC is so lucky to have so many incredible volunteers who work tirelessly on these massive projects, and everything that gets accomplished at PHC would not be possible without all of these people working together. And so there are lots of different pieces of getting items accessioned and getting them accepted into the collection, and getting the information about them that we need in order to accession them and have them entered into Past Perfect's inventory in a way that is comprehensive and that will allow people searching them to get the most out of them. I don't know the specific projects that other volunteers are working on, but I know that there are lots of different people working on different steps that will be required to enter things online. And while it would be great to have a bit more of a quicker timeline, it all really depends on who's working on what. And so we always need volunteers. So if people want to volunteer, that could be something that you come to PHC and do.
Great. I've got another question here from one of our volunteers who'd like to learn more about what's in the Saturday Club collection. And I have a question that's kind of tangential to that, which is, how did you create the finding aid template? What resources did you pull from to decide what to include?
Absolutely. So I'll answer that Saturday Club collection question first, because that's a little bit shorter. That is a fantastic collection. There are all sorts of stuff in there. There are receipts, lots of receipts from several years. The women of the Saturday Club rented out space to hold their meetings, space to hold lots of like monthly dances and events that they put on, larger plays that they put on when they were renting these certain spaces throughout Brunswick. They had to sometimes pay like electric bills. They were going and they were buying coffee and sugar and ingredients like cookies and stuff from different stores in town. That's exciting because it tells us not only an idea of businesses and what circles these women were moving in, but it also gives us an idea of what stores and what buildings were in Brunswick at that time. There are also lots and lots and lots of programs. from different plays and different events that these women put on. There was so much more than I had realized. I thought maybe they were doing one play a year. No, they were doing so much more than that. They did everything from plays that were written by people in, the Saturday Club to evenings that were just women rehearsing Shakespeare sonnets. There was every. There were musical performances, all sorts of things. That's actually the largest folder in that collection, is all these programs. There are also letters of correspondence that aren't personal letters, but rather letters between officers of the Saturday Club saying, oh, we need to do this, or make sure that you pay this person for this, those types of things. But it was a very interesting box to go through. I learned a lot more about the women. There were also what they called yearbooks, which was a little booklet, and nicely bound little booklet for different years that listed every month and what the events were that they had hosted every month. And from one of those, from the first one, I actually learned that the Saturday Club was founded out of a group of women in a high school class who decided that they wanted to continue getting together and meeting. And I believe it was actually about 30 women who first created the Saturday Club. So there was a large following for that. I'm so sorry, Amy, what was your other question?
No, that's okay. I just was wondering if you could talk about the how you decided what the template for finding aids would look like.
So at my previous internship, I got to work with a finding aid template, and also get a little bit more hands-on practice going through other finding aids and large collections. And so I drew from that. And I also looked through several of the collections, not nearly a big percentage of them because there are so many, but I did get to look through several and sort of determine the types of items that are in some of the boxes. And so added areas to include, a summary, an area for dates, and search terms that are going to be important. And then the fun part about the finding aid is that a large section of it is going to be determined by what's in the collection and by who is filling out the finding aid. So whatever volunteer in the future gets to work with some of these collections will get to decide how that particular finding aid is organized based off of what is in that collection.
Following on from that, James Tanzer, who's one of our volunteers as well as a researcher here, first of all, he says that he really appreciates the creation of the template for the finding aid, probably because he's going to be one of the people creating a finding aid here. But he's wondering if you could share some of the challenges that you encountered working with the PHC collections, as I'm sure he's also encountered and gone through some challenges here. That's one of the fun but also challenging things. So what were some of the challenges that you encountered?
Thank you so much for coming, Jamie. Some of the things I think for me are just going to be things that people who've worked at either PHC or any archive can relate to. The idea sort of like preservation of items and how important it is that we catalog them and make that digitized. Because quite a few of the things that I found were either letters or manuscript, a lot of bills of sale from the 1800s, and we have some that are earlier. And so a lot of those are understandably very fragile. And also just when you get a collection, when you get items donated, a lot of times they just all get put in a box and put on the shelf. And so trying to find some sort of organization for them that is a bit comprehensive. It can be a bit overwhelming when you open up a whole box of a bunch of items and you think, oh my gosh, how do I even begin to organize this or sift through it? And so I think those were the two really big things for me that I found a bit challenging with that in that regard.
We had someone else who has a similar kind of question, but wants to know more about your thoughts on um, balancing access, digitization, and outreach. That portion of sort of outward-facing things that we need to do with the archives, with the actual physical materials and conservation. How do you, as someone who's working on accessibility, you want things to be more accessible, but at the same time, only certain we only have certain resources to make things accessible digitally and stuff. Just some basic thoughts on that process.
Absolutely, that's a really good one. So PHC, works off of donations and volunteers, and so obviously conservation is massively important to archives and somewhere like PHC. One of the really great things about starting the process of digitizing things and cataloging things carefully is that we are able to put things out there to be like, oh, look what we have, and gain interest, gain donations, and then be able to use that to take care of the things that we have. When I was going through Past Perfect and adding to and organizing entries that were already in there, I got to look at quite a few pictures. One of the ones that I had showed earlier of the mailmen, you could notice that the corner had all sorts of damage to it. So the photographs that I worked through 2 years worth of photographs, and I went through and I looked at each one. I was checking for any handwriting on the back, for any more information about the pictures, but I was also looking and checking the damage and the condition of the photographs. We have a section in Past Perfect, which is not so much for the researcher side, but a bit more for the maintenance side. And you are able to enter what items are in what condition. And so that's important for us because, when one of our volunteers does look at items, we're able to catalog that. And again, we work off volunteers, so it can be a little bit of a slow process. But once we have that logged, then we're able to go in and go back and make sure that those items are attended to and cared for the way that they need to be.
And I just want to clarify, a couple of times Hannah's mentioned researchers as well as putting Past Perfect online. And I just wanted to clarify for everyone the process that we're going through to do that. So this year, we have created a research terminal so that when researchers come in, they do, as Hannah was saying, have direct access to Past Perfect through a researcher portal. They can do that here in our research area, but we don't yet have the capability of having our collections online for people to see at home. So as far as I understand our process, and as Hannah said, it's funding dependent, please donate. It's funding dependent, is to move our collections to the online version, meaning that it would be I think sort of cloud-based, where we will have access to it. And then I believe a step after that is to allow the public to have access. And so what Hannah has been working on, and other volunteers and consultants, is to sort of make what we have in Past Perfect consistent, and as clear and easy to use as possible and as correct as possible, which will then allow us to move it onto the online version, where we as staff and volunteers and members of the collections committee can then continue to increase the quality of what we have on there and add to it. And then we can make that available to researchers who will be able to use it at home. And what this means is that the sky's the limit for PHC as far as accessibility goes. Our items, everything that Hannah has seen as an intern, people at home will have access to, and that increases our relevance and the relevance of our collection, because it's no good at all to have all of the things that we have if they're packed away and nobody can use them or see them. So that's why the work that Hannah is doing and the work that our volunteers and other fantastic interns are doing is really important. So if anybody, does anyone have any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and pop in if you have a question, or put it in the chat box, or if Hannah has anything else to say. I think, let me just check the questions. I think I got everybody. A couple of comments just to say congratulations and well done, Hannah. And I will echo that. The Putting History to Work program has not steered us wrong yet. We've had fantastic interns, really, really talented, intelligent, forward-thinking people, and that's what we need here and really value at PHC. So thank you for your work, Hannah, and thank you for Putting History to Work program sending you our way. All right, well, I think that's going to do it for today. And thank you all again so much for coming and hearing what Hannah has to say. I don't know if any of you aren't members and want to become members. Again, one of the benefits is getting our Cupola print newsletter. And Hannah will have an article in our next print newsletter talking about her work a bit more. And if you're not a member but would like to sign up for our e-news, please do go on our website and hit the contact us button and just let us know, and we're happy to put you on that list. So thanks again, Hannah, and everyone. We hope to see you at our next event or when you stop in. Thanks very much. Bye.